I've never been great at talking about my past, especially with strangers online, but I think this one needs context. Growing up, I never really had a stable family. My mom had a revolving door of boyfriends, none of whom were anything like family. The worst was this guy, let's call him Tom. He moved in when I was 12, acting like he owned the place, like every word he said was law. And Christmases with him? Absolute torture. I remember one Christmas Eve like it was yesterday. I was 15, and we were sitting around the tree while my mom tried to pour some forced cheer into the room. Tom was drinking his usual, probably something stronger than he should have been, and he leaned back in his chair, smirking at me. "Your real dad didn't want you," he said, loud enough for my mom to hear. "Why should we?" I froze. My fork clattered against my plate. My mom's face went pale, but she didn't say a word. I wanted to yell, to throw something at him, but instead, I stayed quiet. I looked down at my hands, pretending to care about the mashed potatoes. My chest felt like it was going to explode. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how little I actually mattered to the people who were supposed to care about me. I felt invisible, unworthy, like someone had branded "not wanted" across my chest. After that, I started keeping my head down at home. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I didn't ask for anything. I became this ghost of myself, pretending everything was fine while inside, I was planning my escape. Not literally, but mentally. I promised myself I'd make something of my life, something real, something they couldn't touch. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into academics and sports, anything to feel some kind of control. Teachers noticed. Coaches noticed. For the first time, I felt like my efforts mattered somewhere, even if they didn't at home. My mom tried to shield me sometimes, but honestly, she was too wrapped up in her own guilt and fear to fight Tom. And honestly, I stopped expecting her to. That Christmas was the turning point for me. Not because I learned some deep life lesson, but because I realized how much I hated feeling powerless. I started thinking, maybe one day, I wouldn't be invisible. Maybe I'd have the power to decide who deserved my respect and who didn't. By the time I graduated high school, I was already planning the next 10 years of my life. College, internships, networking. I wasn't going to let anyone define my worth again. Not my mom, not Tom, not some ghost of a father who gave up on me. I didn't tell anyone about what he said that Christmas, not even my closest friends. It was a scar I carried silently, but it fueled me every single day. And now, 10 years later, after school, early career moves, and endless nights grinding through bank training programs, I'm standing in a position I'd only dreamed of back then. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I've never been great at talking about my past, especially online where everyone thinks their life is some kind of movie. But this one matters. Growing up, I didn't really have a family. Not in the way other kids had. My mom had a revolving door of boyfriends, none of whom were anything like family. The worst was Tom. He moved in when I was 12, acting like he owned the place, like every word he said was law. He never tried to hide the disdain he had for me. And Christmases with him? They were a nightmare, like living in a snow globe filled with judgment and fear. I remember one Christmas Eve like it happened yesterday. I was 15, sitting at the dinner table, my plate half filled with food I didn't even want. My mom was trying. God, she was really trying to keep it festive. There were lights on the tree, the smell of burnt sugar cookies in the oven, the usual holiday playlist softly playing in the background. But Tom, he was already in his element. A drink in one hand, his smirk plastered across his face like he owned every inch of the house. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on me. "Your real dad didn't want you," he said, loud enough that I knew he meant for me to hear. Maybe even to humiliate me. Why should we? I froze. My fork hit the plate with a clatter. My mom's face went pale, but she didn't say a word. For a second, I actually thought my ears had betrayed me. Maybe I misheard. But no, the words hung in the air like smoke, and I felt them wrap around my chest like a vice. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to let him know he couldn't break me. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I looked down at my hands, clenched tight in my lap, pretending the mashed potatoes were the most important thing in the world. My chest felt heavy. My stomach churned. I felt invisible. Not just unseen, but unworthy. A burden. A mistake. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the strings of Christmas lights reflected through my window. I thought about the dad I barely knew, the one who chose to walk away, and wondered if that meant something was inherently wrong with me. I wondered why my mom didn't fight for me. And then I realized she probably didn't know how. Or maybe she didn't want to risk it with Tom. Either way, I decided right there I wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of breaking me again. After that, I started keeping my head down at home. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I didn't ask for anything. I became this ghost, pretending everything was fine while inside. I was plotting a future where no one could ever make me feel small like that again. School became my sanctuary. I poured myself into academics, into sports, into anything that gave me a sense of control. Teachers noticed. Coaches noticed. For the first time, I felt like my efforts mattered somewhere, even if they didn't at home. My mom tried to shield me sometimes, but honestly, she was too wrapped up in her guilt and fear to really fight Tom. And honestly, I stopped expecting her to. That Christmas was the turning point. Not because I suddenly understood life or found some mystical strength, but because I realized how much I hated feeling powerless. I promised myself that one day, I would define my own worth. I would control who deserved my respect and who didn't. I became the quiet kid in the house, the one who never spoke unless spoken to, the one who moved silently through their world, measuring, learning, and waiting. I watched Tom closely, noting his patterns, how he treated people he thought were beneath him. I stored that memory of him saying my dad didn't want me like some blueprint for the future, what I would never become, and who I would never allow in my life. By the time I graduated high school, I had a plan. College, internships, networking, learning the ins and outs of banking. I didn't just want to escape. They taught me how much I hated feeling powerless. I wanted influence, authority, a position where no one could ever tell me I didn't matter. Every paycheck I earned, every promotion I got, every small win I accumulated was a brick in the wall I was building around that old version of myself. The scared, quiet kid who got told he didn't belong. I didn't talk about this with friends. Not really. It wasn't something you casually drop into conversation. It was a scar I carried silently, feeding me, motivating me. And 10 years later, that scar turned into a kind of armor. After college, after long nights grinding through training programs, certifications, and internships, I had finally climbed into a role that I had only dared dream about back in that nightmare of a living room. Branch manager at a mid-sized bank. But no amount of preparation could have warned me for the moment that would make all of this feel poetic. I walked into the branch on what should have been just another Tuesday, ready to crush the day's meetings and schedules, not knowing that the ghost of Christmas Eve was about to walk through the door in the flesh. The same man who once made me feel invisible. The man who had sat across from me, declaring I wasn't wanted. And suddenly, 10 years of silence, struggle, and persistence were about to meet the very person who thought I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't recognize him at first. Not immediately. When he walked into the bank that morning, I was buried in paperwork and schedules, making sure everything was running smoothly. But then I glanced up from my desk, and there he was, Tom. Same smug grin, same posture like he owned the place. Only now, he looked smaller somehow, less intimidating. Years had taken their toll on him, but the arrogance hadn't faded. He was standing at the lobby, shuffling some papers, clearly trying to act like he had a legitimate reason to be there. My stomach twisted, memories flooding back to that Christmas Eve. The words, the tone, the way he made me feel completely disposable. I had to remind myself to breathe, to keep my composure. I couldn't let him see how much he still affected me, even after all this time. I walked over, ID badge clipped neatly to my chest, smiling the professional smile I'd practiced for years. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" He turned, eyes widening slightly as if he didn't recognize me at first. And then his expression shifted, a flicker of confusion mixed with curiosity. "Wait, you're the manager here?" I nodded, keeping my voice calm, controlled. "Yes, I am. How can I assist you?" He shuffled his papers again, nervously. I need a loan. A business loan. I've got some property, some assets, just need the bank's support, you know?" I kept nodding, still smiling, though inside I was already replaying that long ago Christmas, every insult, every dismissive look, every time he'd made me feel like I didn't belong. And now, here he was, asking me for help. From me. I glanced down at the paperwork he'd handed over. Nothing fraudulent, nothing criminal, but also nothing that met the bank's requirements. And honestly, after everything, I didn't feel the least bit inclined to approve it. I could see the desperation in his eyes, but it didn't stir sympathy. Not even a little. Sir, I said, keeping my voice neutral but firm. I've reviewed your documents, and unfortunately, this loan doesn't meet our requirements. I'm going to have to deny it. He blinked, clearly stunned. Wait, what? Why? I've got assets. I've got collateral. I. I raised a hand politely to stop him. I'm sorry, but based on our policies, I can't approve this. He leaned in, voice lowering, trying to intimidate me like he used to at home. You don't know what you're doing. This is my property, my business. I straightened, finally letting the calm mask slip just a fraction. Actually, sir, I do know exactly what I'm doing. And you don't belong here. His face froze. Excuse me. I took a step closer, voice quiet but sharp. Remove yourself from the premises. Security will escort you out if necessary. You don't belong here. You never did. There was a pause, like the air itself had thickened. He opened his mouth, probably to say something, probably to argue. But the look on my face, the certainty, the authority, I think he realized that this time, the power dynamic had completely flipped. From the corner of my eye, I saw a security guard moving closer. I didn't even have to say anything more. Tom paled, shuffled backward, muttering under his breath, and for the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He didn't have a smug grin. He didn't have the confidence to make me feel small. As security gently but firmly escorted him out, I felt something inside me shift. Not triumph, exactly. Not happiness. It was more like closure. 10 years of humiliation, of feeling unwanted, of being invisible. All of it crystallized in that moment. In a simple but decisive action, he didn't belong. And I had the power to enforce that truth. I returned to my desk, sitting down, still trying to calm my racing heart. The other employees glanced at me, some with curiosity, some with silent acknowledgement. I didn't need to explain. The moment had spoken for itself. Later that day, I caught my reflection in the glass door as I stepped outside for a break. For a long moment, I barely recognized myself. The confident, composed man staring back wasn't the scared, quiet kid from that Christmas Eve. That kid had survived. He had fought silently, clawed his way through years of struggle, and finally, he was standing in his own power. I thought about my mom for a second. I didn't call her that day, didn't send a text. Part of me wanted to. Part of me even considered sending her a subtle message, but I realized it didn't matter. I wasn't seeking validation from her anymore. I wasn't seeking it from anyone who had doubted me, abandoned me, or made me feel less than. I had built my own life, my own rules, my own sense of worth. The rest of the day passed normally, but nothing felt normal. I checked the security logs, made sure Tom was logged out, and then returned to my work. Every client, every interaction, every decision felt like a small reinforcement of what I had achieved. The power I'd once only dreamed about was now tangible, and it felt incredible. That night, driving home, I thought about the Christmases I'd spent cowering in that living room, about the fear, the humiliation, and the silent promises I had made to myself. For the first time in a decade, I felt fully at peace with that past. Not because I forgave him, or even because I wanted to, but because I realized I had outgrown it. Outgrown him. And nothing could take that away. After Tom was escorted out, the rest of the day felt surreal. I kept replaying the scene in my head. His face when he realized he couldn't intimidate me, the way his smugness crumbled into nervous shuffles, the quiet acknowledgement of defeat as security let him out. Part of me expected some lingering anxiety to creep in afterward, but surprisingly, there wasn't any. Just a strange mix of calm and satisfaction, though not in the way most people think. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Finally, the scales had shifted. I sent a few follow-up emails, checked in with my team, and made sure everything at the branch was on track. Clients didn't notice anything unusual. The day carried on as usual. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had taken a decisive turn. 10 years of grinding, of proving myself, of silently promising I wouldn't be powerless ever again. It had all led to this moment. Around mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. I froze when I saw it, debating whether to open it. 10 years had created a strange distance between us. I wasn't sure if I wanted to reopen old wounds. or if her curiosity was genuine or just obligatory. Eventually, I tapped it open. It was short, just 3 words. Did you see him? I stared at it for a while, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to type a scathing reply, a mix of sarcasm and righteous anger. But then I realized something. It didn't matter. My feelings weren't tied to her recognition anymore. I hadn't needed validation from her in years, and I certainly wasn't going to let her question my actions. I typed back something neutral, something factual. Yes. Handled. The conversation ended there. I didn't feel the need to continue it. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I was finally at a place where my worth wasn't dictated by anyone else's perception, especially not the people who had let me down when I was 12, 15, or even 20. Later, I found myself reflecting on the past decade. High school, college, early career, every struggle, every sleepless night, every rejection. It all had a purpose I hadn't realized at the time. Those experiences had hardened me, yes, but they had also sharpened me. They'd given me perspective, resilience, and a sense of justice tempered by professionalism. And now, here I was, sitting in a position I had earned entirely on my own merits. The thought of Tom coming back to me, years later, expecting something from me, it was almost laughable. I had once been the scared kid hiding behind mashed potatoes and Christmas lights. Now, I was the one with authority, with power, with the ability to decide outcomes that affected people like him. And for once, I didn't feel a shred of guilt for exercising it. I started thinking about the psychology of it, how people like Tom operate. They thrive on fear, on submission, on the knowledge that someone else feels inferior. That's how he controlled my life back then, subtly, emotionally. He didn't have to hit or yell all the time. His words alone were enough to make me shrink. And I realized the brilliance of my response. I hadn't resorted to yelling, humiliating, or mocking him. I had simply stood in my authority and let him face the consequences of his own entitlement. That was far more effective than anything I could have imagined. By the time the workday ended, I felt this strange sense of closure settling over me. Not the kind that comes from revenge movies or dramatic Instagram captions. No, this was quiet, dignified closure. I had proven something, not just to Tom, but to myself, that I wasn't a child anymore, that I wasn't defined by the words or the neglect of others, that I could face someone who once made me feel worthless and remain unshaken, even in a setting where they thought they still had power. I drove home that evening, the city lights reflecting on the wet streets from an earlier drizzle. I thought about Christmas Eve all those years ago. I thought about the fear, the humiliation, the quiet desperation I'd felt. And I smiled to myself, not in a cruel way, but in a reflective, almost grateful way. That experience, painful as it had been, had pushed me to work harder, to plan smarter, and to become someone who truly couldn't be belittled by anyone. When I walked in the door, the apartment felt like mine. Not because I owned it, but because I felt grounded. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for judgment or ridicule. I was present, in control, and for the first time, the past felt like just that, the past. I didn't have to carry it in anger anymore, only in lessons learned. I didn't reach out to my mom that night. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post on social media. I didn't need to announce my victory. It wasn't about external validation. It never had been. It was about me knowing, deep down, that the kid who had once felt invisible now had the power to define who belonged and who didn't. And for the first time, that power felt fully mine. The next few days after Tom's visit were weirdly quiet. He didn't call. He didn't email. He didn't show up again. I even checked the security logs a few times, almost half expecting him to sneak back in, trying to reclaim some shred of authority he clearly thought he still had. But he didn't. And honestly, that silence was louder than anything he could have said. I got messages from a few colleagues who had noticed the tension in the lobby that day. Was that? One asked, voice hesitant. I just nodded and said, handled, like before. No embellishment, no dramatics. I didn't need to justify anything. What I did in that moment wasn't about ego. It was about finally setting boundaries that should have been set years ago. And part of me wanted to savor that boundary quietly, privately, without anyone else's input. But as the days passed, I realized something else. Tom's absence didn't erase the memories, the scars, or the fear I'd carried for so long. It did, however, put them into perspective. I started thinking about all those years I'd spent shrinking in that living room, feeling unwanted, pretending everything was fine while inside I was simmering with resentment. I could almost see the kid I used to be, crouched behind a chair, feeling like the world had already written me off. And then I compared him to the man I'd become. Sitting in a position of authority, respected by my team, clients trusting my judgment, decisions reflecting my competence rather than my past trauma. It hit me, almost like a punchline I wasn't expecting. That scared, invisible kid had quietly, stubbornly, meticulously built himself into someone who could never be intimidated by a person like Tom again. I thought about calling my mom. Part of me wanted to. Maybe to share the moment with someone who had at least tried to protect me in her own way. But another part of me realized it didn't matter. That chapter of my life had closed the moment Tom left my branch that Tuesday morning. Whether she recognized my growth or not was irrelevant. The point wasn't validation, it was acknowledgement of self-worth. And I had that now, fully and undeniably. Then came a small, almost surreal surprise. A client, older gentleman, had been waiting in line during Tom's visit, came up to me a couple of days later. I just wanted to say, the way you handled that man the other day? Professional, yet firm. That's rare. Not many could do what you did without losing composure. I nodded, thanked him politely. And inside, I felt this strange mix of satisfaction and relief. It wasn't about boasting. It was about seeing that my actions, my authority, my sense of justice were being recognized in a world where, for so long, I felt invisible. But as the week went on, something else started creeping in. I realized that Tom's visit had done more than just reinforce my self-worth. It had made me hyper-aware of patterns, behaviors, and people who might try to take advantage of my past or my authority now. I started observing my staff more closely, checking procedures, making sure policies were enforced strictly, not out of paranoia, but because I wanted to ensure that no one could manipulate me like Tom had manipulated me. It was a strange side effect, but necessary. By Friday, the branch felt different. Not because anything had changed structurally, but because the energy in the air had shifted. I noticed my team walking a little taller, seeing the respect in their eyes when they passed my office. I caught snippets of conversation about how the manager handled that guy, and smirked quietly to myself. That respect wasn't just about me. It was about what I represented, someone who had overcome, who had claimed authority not through force, but through competence, strategy, and composure. That weekend, I finally let myself relax. I went for a run, the cold wind cutting against my face, each step feeling symbolic, like I was moving further away from the kid I once was. I thought about Christmas Eve, about Tom, about my mom, and about all the small, quiet victories I'd collected along the way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because the past was erased, but because it had been transformed into something useful, a fuel, a reminder, a reason to never let anyone dictate my worth again. I even caught myself thinking ahead, imagining scenarios where someone like Tom might cross paths with me again in the future. Only now, it didn't scare me. It didn't make me shrink. It didn't make me doubt myself. If he ever tried anything, I knew exactly how to handle it. Calmly, firmly, professionally, with authority, and if necessary, with the same quiet decisiveness that had worked so perfectly that first day he walked into my branch. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the journey. I thought about how fragile the lines between fear and confidence, power and impotence, really are. I thought about how one man's words could haunt a kid for years, and yet how the same kid, through persistence, intelligence, and self-respect, could turn the tables completely. I realized something important. Life doesn't give you control over what happens to you, but it does give you control over how you respond. And that, ultimately, was my victory. I didn't call my mom. I didn't call Tom. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. I didn't need to. Because the moment wasn't about external recognition. It was about internal reckoning. About finally standing in a place where no one's words, no one's neglect, no one's cruelty could touch me. About finally proving, to myself more than anyone else, that I belonged. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't in years, fully, undeniably, at home in my own skin. It took a few weeks before I heard anything about Tom again. Part of me expected him to try sneaking back in, maybe to argue, plead, or find some loophole. But nothing. Silence. And honestly, that silence was the most satisfying sound I could imagine. Not revenge, not humiliation, just the quiet acknowledgement that he had no power over me anymore. Then one Friday morning, the phone rang at the branch. I picked it up, fully expecting it to be a client or some standard inquiry. But the voice on the other end was familiar, panicked, strained. It was him. "Please, I need a loan. It's urgent. I don't know where else to go," he stammered. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a second, letting that Christmas Eve memory surface one last time. The fork clattering on the plate, his smug grin, the way my chest had felt like it was going to explode. And then I opened my eyes, clear and steady. This was the culmination of 10 years. The scared kid had grown into someone unshakable. "Sir," I said calmly, "I reviewed your request last time. Nothing has changed. You do not meet the bank's requirements. I cannot approve your loan." There was a long pause on the line. I could almost hear him gathering thoughts, probably rehearsing some kind of manipulation. Then, finally, he muttered, "Please, I just need." I cut him off, voice firm. "I'm going to be direct. This isn't a personal vendetta. It's business. And you, like you were told years ago, do not belong here. Security will escort you out if necessary." End of discussion. The silence that followed was almost palpable. I didn't hear anything else from him for the rest of the day. I didn't have to. Part of me knew he understood now, more clearly than ever, that his arrogance, his sense of entitlement, his attempts to belittle me in the past, they had no bearing on my life now. He wasn't owed anything. He never had been. Later that afternoon, a colleague stopped by my office. "I just wanted to say, that was impressive. You handled him perfectly. I wouldn't have had the patience." I shrugged, but inside I felt a deep sense of calm. It wasn't about showing off or gloating. It was about integrity, about finally being the person I had always wanted to be, not defined by fear, not diminished by neglect, and absolutely not constrained by the people who had tried to make me small. That evening, I drove home, reflecting on the past decade. I thought about the Christmas Eves I'd spent sitting quietly at that table, feeling like I didn't matter. I thought about the sleepless nights studying, working, building something tangible out of nothing. And I realized, in that moment, that all those years of pain had been a foundation, not a prison. They had shaped me, sharpened me, and prepared me to stand here now, fully in command of my own life. At home, I poured a glass of whiskey, something I rarely did, and raised it quietly. To who? To me. To the kid who had been invisible. To the man who finally belonged. I didn't need to tell anyone. No one else needed to witness this victory. It was mine, fully and completely. A week later, Tom tried again, showing up in person this time. I didn't even have to speak. My assistant recognized him, froze, and quietly called security. I watched from my office as the same man who had once towered over me, who had made me feel worthless for a decade, was calmly, quietly escorted out the door. No yelling, no theatrics, just the quiet, undeniable truth: he didn't belong. And for the first time, it wasn't me shrinking to fit into someone else's definition of worth. It was him realizing, finally, that he wasn't owed access, approval, or respect from me. That night, I walked past my old neighborhood in the city, the streets quiet, lights reflecting off wet asphalt. I thought about that Christmas Eve one last time. I remembered every detail. The way he said those words, the silence of my mom, the way my little heart had felt like it was breaking. And I smiled, softly, because the story had changed. The narrative wasn't about fear anymore. It was about growth, about triumph, about claiming your own life when someone else tried to dictate it. I didn't reach out to my mom. I didn't call anyone to brag. I didn't post it online. I didn't have to, because this wasn't a story anyone else needed to validate. The kid I had once been would have dreamed of this exact moment, and now, standing in my own power, I didn't need anyone else to see it. I had lived it. I had earned it. Months later, I saw a news clipping about a small business loan being denied for lack of collateral. The name attached to it made me smirk, Tom. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt peace. Life had balanced itself out. Not through revenge, not through theatrics, not through any petty satisfaction. Just through me living fully, authentically, and with the authority I had spent years quietly building. That Christmas Eve, the memory that once made me small, invisible, and unwanted, now made me stronger. It reminded me of where I came from and how far I had gone. And for the first time, I could truly say, without hesitation, that I belonged. No one else could ever take that away from me.